June 1941. Nazi Germany unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The strategic prize was immense, but the psychological goal was equally clear: the destruction of Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg, the cradle of the Russian Revolution, and a symbolic heart of the Soviet state. Hitler issued a direct, terrifying order. The city was not to be taken, but to be starved and wiped from the map. The German Army Group North was to encircle the city, then let the climate and famine do the rest. On September 8, 1941, the last land route was cut. The siege began. For the next 900 days and nights, nearly 3 million Soviet citizens, soldiers, women, children, and artists were trapped. They faced relentless shelling, extreme cold, and a starvation diet that dropped to catastrophic levels. Against all historical odds, the people of Leningrad would refuse to surrender. This is the story of the longest, most tragic siege in history, a testament to endurance forged in the icy crucible of the Eastern Front. This is the story of the 900 days. As the German and Finnish armies sealed the land ring, the catastrophe was immediate. The city had only 30 days of food supply left. Leningrad had become a giant, defenseless fortress. The first winter of 1941-42 was the deadliest. Temperatures plummeted to 40 Betu circa text. See 40 days, 40 see circa text. F Foyt. The fuel depots had been bombed, leaving the vast majority of apartments and public buildings without heat. People burned furniture, books, and anything they could find just to stay alive for a few hours. Worst of all was the famine. The daily civilian ration was cut repeatedly, stabilizing at a mere 125 grams of bread per person, a daily intake of fewer than 500 calories. This bread was not pure flour. It was often mixed with sawdust, cellulose, and whatever organic fillers could be found. Mass deaths became a daily reality. People died in their apartments, on the sidewalks, and in bread lines. They were too weak to bury their dead. The lack of food, coupled with the sub-zero temperatures, meant that by the end of that first winter, over 1 million people had perished. The human spirit seemed utterly broken, yet the city's factories, fueled by exhausted workers, continued to produce vital military equipment. The city had only one tenuous link to the outside world: the vast, frozen expanse of Lake Ladoga. This became known as the Doroga Zhizni, the Road of Life. Starting in November 1941, convoys of trucks attempted the impossible journey across the cracking, shifting ice of the lake. The route was constantly threatened by German artillery and air attacks. Luftwaffe pilots mercilessly strafed the vulnerable columns of trucks. The ice itself. Trucks either plunged through weak spots into the frigid depths or were tossed about by pressure ridges, blizzards and whiteouts. Visibility dropped to zero, making the drive a suicidal gamble. Yet, the convoys never stopped. Thousands of drivers, often young men and women, risked their lives daily to bring tiny amounts of food and evacuate the sick and wounded. The average round trip was only 30 miles, but each mile was an act of profound courage. The road of life was not enough to end the starvation, but it was critical for morale. It was proof that Moscow had not abandoned Leningrad. It kept the heart of the city beating just long enough for the war to turn. Life in Leningrad became a macabre cycle of resilience. Despite the horror, culture endured. The legendary composer Dmitri Shostakovich, who had started the siege in the city, finished his powerful Symphony No. 7, Leningrad, a tribute to the city's defiance. The symphony was performed in the starved city in August 1942 by musicians too weak to hold their instruments. Meanwhile, the Soviet military was preparing its long, brutal counteroffensive. In January 1943, Operation Iskra, Spark, began. The Red Army launched a massive assault across the south shore of Lake Ladoga. After ferocious fighting, a narrow, 8-mile-wide land corridor was finally carved through the German line. This narrow corridor allowed the first railway line to be built into the city. Though the blockade was officially broken, the city remained under the threat of shelling, and the rationing continued. The siege was finally, completely lifted a year later, on January 27, 1944, after the massive Soviet Leningrad-Novgorod offensive drove the German army group north, permanently away from the city's outskirts. The Siege of Leningrad lasted 872 days. The cost was staggering. Historians estimate that as many as 1.5 million people died from starvation, disease, and German shelling. More casualties than the US and British forces combined suffered throughout the entire war. Yet, Leningrad never fell. It stands as a monument to the endurance of the Soviet people and the most profound strategic defeat of Hitler's will on the Eastern Front. The city's refusal to surrender forced the Germans to tie down vast resources in a brutal, ultimately unwinnable attrition campaign. Leningrad was justly awarded the title of Hero City for its unparalleled bravery. The memory of the 900 days is a permanent, heartbreaking reminder of the war's true cost and the immense strength of the human spirit when pushed beyond the breaking point.